Miss Anna, and I'm going to be reading part of The General Rides Again that was published in 1962. And we start, "Well, will you do me a favor?" Big John asked. "Will you tell me about the Great Locomotive Chase? I passed that movie at the drive-in so fast that night that I never did find out how the chase came out, or what it was all about exactly." The General beamed. "Will I tell you about the chase? Son, that's like asking a fat boy if he'll tell you about candy. I'll tell you anything you want to know." "Well, first, just where did the Great Locomotive Chase take place and when?" Big John asked. The General gave it to him exactly. The chase had taken place on an 87-mile stretch of the old Western and Atlantic track between Atlanta and Chattanooga. The date was April 12, 1862. At the time, the General was pulling 3 freight cars and 2 coaches. The chase really started at a little place called Big Shanty, Georgia, about 30 miles above Atlanta, the General said. It's called Kennesaw now, but they're changing the name back to Big Shanty soon. Anyway, I pulled in there around 6 o'clock in the morning, and my crew, headed by Jeff Kane, the engineer, Will Fuller, the conductor, and Anthony Murphy, an engineering foreman from the W&A, went into a little hotel near the station for breakfast. But they never got to eat it. "You mean that's when the Yankee Raiders stole you?" Big John asked. "When your crew went in for breakfast?" "Yep," the General said. "But let me put you straight about something first. Those Yankees weren't out to just steal a train. The North already had a lot more trains than the Confederacy had. What they wanted to do was take off in a train and burn bridges as they went along. If they burned the bridges down, it would put the railroads out of whack for weeks, and the Confederacy couldn't get supplies from Atlanta to Chattanooga fast enough for the armies in Tennessee and further north. That would be such a blow that it might end the whole war. So you can see what a mess I was when they stole me." "I sure can," Big John said. "But how many of those Yankee Raiders were there at Big Shanty that morning, and how did they manage to steal you?" "There were 20 of the scamps," the General said. 19 Union soldiers and Captain Jim Andrews, the Union Secret Service operator. All of them were dressed in civilian clothes, just plain clothes, that is. They had boarded my train at Marietta, back the track a little piece, and everybody thought they were just regular passengers. We soon found out different, though. When my crew got off on one side of the train at Big Shanty, Captain Andrews and his men got off on the other side and went to work. They uncoupled the 2 passenger cars from my 3 freight cars, and then, the next thing I knew, a tall fellow with a black beard was in my cab. This sly devil was Captain Andrews, it turned out, and he didn't waste a second. He said something to the 2 men in my cab with him, and then he gave me the throttle. There wasn't a thing I could do but cut loose with a lot of steam and smoke to let my crew know what was happening. Then I was headed down the track, and the Great Locomotive Chase was on. "You mean your crew got hold of another locomotive and started chasing you?" Big John asked. The General frowned. "Nope. The Raiders had counted on there not being another locomotive at Big Shanty that time of morning, and there wasn't. When my crew, Kane, Fuller, and Murphy, saw me being stolen, they rushed out of that hotel dining room like a bunch of flushed quail and borrowed a push car and started chasing me on it. They made a slow chase of it because those high-tailing Yankees kept stopping me every now and then and piling cross ties on the track and tearing up rails. But my new crew finally made it into the town of Etowah, about 10 miles up the track. Then they transferred from the push car to a locomotive, Yonah, and headed for Kingston. They thought I would find the tracks blocked there, a southbound freight coming from the other direction. "But you must not have been blocked," Big John said. "Nope," sighed the General. "Only long enough for the slippery Captain Andrews to fool the station agent into believing that he was a Confederate officer, and we were hauling ammunition for General Beauregard and had to get through fast. Of course, Corporal Tagalong, my tender, and I knew there wasn't anything in our 3 freight cars except Yankee raiders. There wasn't anything we could do though, but keep heading north and stopping every so often for them to tear up some more rails. I was getting madder than a snapping turtle on his back, and my crew behind me was too. They pulled into Kingston about an hour after we had gone through. When the station agent told them what had happened, they transferred from the Yonah to a faster locomotive called the William R. Smith. They headed after me again. Then they didn't get but 4 miles beyond Kingston before they were stopped by the rails we had torn up. And by that time, I had been dealt another blow by my crafty Yankee friends. By that, I mean when we pulled into the outskirts of Adairsville, we found the tracks blocked by my old friend, the Locomotive Texas. He was pulling a freight. Right away, Captain Andrews told the engineer the same story he had told the station agent about our having ammunition for General Beauregard. I nearly busted my boilers when the engineer sidetracked the Texas and let us through. Then, as soon as we went through the town of Calhoun, Captain Andrews stopped me and his men got out to tear up some more rails. And it was then that the chase started getting real hot. Under his canvas cover, the general chuckled. Yes, sir, it got hotter than a scalded cat, because as soon as they started to tear up that track, I heard a locomotive whistle behind me. The Yankees heard it too. They looked back, and coming around a bend was the Texas. But General, Big John interrupted, I thought the Texas had let you pass at Adairsville and was headed the other way. The General chuckled again. You're right, son. But when the Texas headed south again, it met my conductor, Will Fuller, walking alongside the track. Will was a regular bloodhound when he got on your trail. He had left the locomotive, William R. Smith, where it had been stopped by the torn-up track, and was headed towards Adairsville on foot, looking for another locomotive. When he told the engineer of the Texas what had happened, the engineer backed into Adairsville and left his freight cars on a sidetrack. Then, with the Texas still running backwards, they started after me. When they rounded the bend, it was the prettiest sight I ever saw. But Captain Andrews and his men didn't seem to think so, naturally. They all piled back on board and off we went again. I figured it wouldn't be long before the Texas caught me because I was pulling tag-along and 3 freight cars. But then Captain Andrews came up with another Yankee trick. We went around a bend, and as we did, he had his men cut the tail end freight car loose. It started rolling back down the tracks in the direction of the Texas. I knew that it would slow Fuller and the Texas down, and it did. But it didn't slow them down as long as Captain Andrews had hoped it would. Like I told you, his main job was to burn railroad bridges. Well, we stopped and they tried to burn a big covered bridge over the Oostenaula River. It had been raining all day though, and before they could get the wet wood burning, here came the Texas again. It was pushing the freight car we had cut loose. All that Captain Andrews could do then was cut my second freight car loose and set it rolling back. Then we lit out. But about 10 miles down the track here came the Texas again, but without my freight cars in front of it. They had shoved off on a siding we had passed. Well, sir, that's when the Texas and I really did some running. On one stretch of track, where the safe speed was supposed to be just 16 miles an hour, we went over 60 miles an hour. Big John interrupted the General again. But General, he said, didn't you feel a little shameful running that fast? After all, you were a Confederate locomotive, but you were helping those Yankee raiders. Hogwash, son, the General said. I wasn't helping them one bit. You see, I knew that the faster I ran, the more logs I would burn, and as soon as Tagalong, my tender, ran out of logs, I would run out of steam, and the chase would be over. "Well, short my switch boxes," Big John said. "I never thought of it that way." "That was my plan, though," the general said, "and that's the way it worked out. I kept highballing north towards Chattanooga and eating up those logs as fast as they threw them in my firebox." The Texas couldn't catch me, but it kept close enough behind me so that the Yankees couldn't stop and try to burn any more bridges. By then, all Captain Andrews and his men were thinking about was escaping. We raced on through the town of Dalton, and then my steam pressure started dropping. We were running out of logs and getting low on water. Then, just outside the town of Ringgold, Captain Andrews had to admit that I had beat him. He told his men to strike out for themselves and try and make it back to the Union lines up in Tennessee. Some of the men jumped off before we went through Ringgold. Captain Andrews and the rest stayed on and tried to force a few more miles out of me. I pulled them to the top of a grade on the other side of Ringgold and then got mulish. I wouldn't budge another cotton-picking foot. They jumped off and headed for the woods. The great locomotive chase was over. It had lasted 8 hours, and I had covered 87 miles. "And had covered yourself with glory too," Big John said proudly, "by running so fast and burning up all that fuel. General, you saved the South that day." "Well," the general drawled modestly, "I wouldn't go so far as that," he paused, "but I do think that I did enough so that the L&N won't scrap me. Don't you?"